Hello and welcome to Inside View. I'm your host, Joel Metzger, and joining me on the show today is Cory Burnell. He's a owner of Blueprint Asset Management in Valley Springs and a financial advisor. Welcome, Cory.
Yeah, thanks, Joel. It's good to be back.
Hey, it's always fun having you on the show. We have some fun topics today. We're going to get into the presidential race, talk about some tax plans and healthcare plans for the nation, which will have local impacts. And then definitely want to get into some financial talk. We'll look into oil and the fluctuations in that price and how it's impacted folks. And if we have time, we might even talk about the state of Jefferson. So stay tuned for that. So anyway, Cory, for folks who may not have seen you, and I know you've been on several times, can you just give my viewers a quick rundown of your background?
Sure. I'm an investment advisor in Valley Springs and also have an office in Sacramento. I have a couple of partners as well with offices in San Ramon and San Diego, where our main office is. I've been in the business since 1999. My wife was born and raised in Valley Springs, and we have 3 children there who we homeschool at Mountain Oaks, right here in San Andreas.
Very cool, very cool. So what is it about Calaveras County that keeps you here?
Oh man, well, one, my wife won't let me leave. No, and I don't want to. You know, it's fantastic here with the lakes, the rivers, the golf courses, the wine country. There's so much to do and see, and then there's also great friends and good people.
Yeah, it seems like everyone who comes on just talks about the community and just how fantastic it is. So I don't blame you. Raising kids in Calaveras County, it's tough to beat for sure.
Yeah.
So let's just get right into it. I think everyone who has any interest in politics or the future of our country has been keeping an eye on the presidential race. And would you agree this has been a non-traditional, non-standard race up to this point?
Yeah. I mean, look, we haven't seen a situation where here you really have 2 outside candidates, outsiders, outside the Beltway, front-running the establishment candidates. I mean, who would think Jeb Bush would have flamed out so quickly? I mean, that's just phenomenal, but it really speaks to where the American electorate is today relative to, say, 4 years or 8 years ago.
So on the Republican side, I would say we have a little bit more of a competitive race than on the Democratic side. Who's kind of left in the field at this point on the Republican side? Yeah,
well, everybody, of course, is talking quite a bit about Donald Trump and the fact that he's lasted this long and not only lasted, but has dominated, really. Mm-hmm. And then we have Ted Cruz, a senator from Texas, as well as Senator Marco Rubio from Florida. Ben Carson and Governor John Kasich are polling up small numbers, so probably not likely that they'll be contenders. We'll see after Florida on March 15th if Rubio will continue to be a contender.
Well, he's taken one state so far and really, I think, underwhelmed many of his supporters with his actual ability to win. So if you're looking at the next couple weeks, I don't think Trump's going to go anywhere. He has such a big lead. He's probably going to go to the convention almost certainly. Who do you think the most likely maybe challenger would be on the Republican side? Yeah,
I think that particularly with Super Tuesday yesterday, there wasn't enough discussion about the fact that delegates are awarded proportionally in most states. There are only really a handful, maybe half dozen to a dozen states left that are winner take all, Florida importantly being one. Mm-hmm. But take Donald Trump's New York is not, so far as I understand. And so the proportional weighting there really makes this still quite an interesting race to watch, because Rubio could continue to garner significant support that could go to Cruz once the convention occurs, or vice versa. To see a statement from Lindsey Graham, who is as establishment gets, and really a relatively liberal Republican, say that he would support Ted Cruz over Donald Trump is really interesting. This politics makes strange bedfellows, right?
So Ted Cruz is someone who just won his home state of Texas and a couple other victories. He's had the most victories other than Donald Trump. What should people know about Mr. Cruz? What are his signature characteristics?
Yeah, I think the unwavering, principled stance he takes on things, which sometimes makes him unpopular with his colleagues, obviously in Congress, because it's a body that constantly compromises, right, to get things done. And he he definitely takes principled stances that lack compromise at times and can be judged that way. So I think that's kind of his signature trait and what people know him for. And sometimes that's found or considered not being likable. But hey, sometimes it's also very valuable when you have somebody in a leadership position when they take a principled stance on something that's correct.
And did I see a couple polls that showed that if Cruz went up against Hillary Clinton, he actually could be victorious in that?
Yeah, he could. And it's interesting. Hillary is probably a very beneficial candidate for any Republican at this time to go up against because of the years worth of baggage that she brings. And I would harken back to the 2014 midterm elections and the overwhelming Republican turnout that occurred in that election, and that we're seeing that bleed into the election this time around as people want anybody other than someone from Washington, D.C. It seems, I mean, Bernie Sanders is not doing badly. He's garnered plenty of delegates, and he's quite, out of left field. So, there's just a sentiment in the country that anybody other than the Beltway, and Hillary is the Beltway. She's the buckle of the Beltway.
Right.
So really, it's a very opportune time for any Republican candidate to go up against her.
But right now, it's looking like Trump is going to be the presumptive nominee. What would you predict would happen if we had a Trump-Hillary race?
Well, because of Trump's background and the lack of details we see from him, that's hard to say as to what could get caught. He could get caught on. I mean, something as simple as not knowing who David Duke was is kind of bizarre. So, is there something else that could, some stumbling blocks that we wouldn't see because he hasn't been a vetted politician? Whereas we kind of know what you're getting with Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz because they've been in that political screen or filter for so long. But I do think that Trump would probably win those swing states that are needed. And we're going to see, we've been surprised by his support throughout the South, for example, and Ted Cruz was supposed to do better in southern states than he did. But when you add Marco Rubio's support to Ted Cruz's support, that's where I think it's important to recognize Trump won some states, but only won with 30 or 35% of the vote some of the time. And so with a third, that left well over 50% that weren't choosing him. But yeah, it's going to be fun.
So for the best interest of the party, at this point, would it make sense for some of these candidates to drop out and try to consolidate behind one candidate if you're trying to not have Trump be your nominee?
I think so. Either direction. If you wanted Trump to be the nominee, the sooner we could get on the same page and not have people attacking that nominee, the better. And perhaps the Republican Party will decide they want Trump to be the nominee. If they don't, then I wouldn't. If you were on the side where you didn't want Trump to be the nominee, I wouldn't lose heart yet because, like I said, there's so many other delegates and voters out there that. If you add them all together that are non-Trump voters right now, they have the opportunity to vote for Trump and they're not. So the idea being, well, okay, would Marco Rubio supporters support Ted Cruz or vice versa, Cruz support Rubio rather than Trump? Probably in large percentages that would be the case.
And just to jump to the Democratic side real quick, we only have two candidates who are making any progress whatsoever, Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton. Hillary has opened up a very large lead, but like you said, Bernie Sanders has done remarkably well considering some of his policies are, like you said, fairly left, quite left.
Yeah.
So what would be your analysis on why someone like Sanders could do so well, actually using the word socialism, which is usually completely taboo in this country?
Yeah.
Or since the 1910s, 15s, yeah.
Well, a lot of Americans are socialists, but they don't like to be called it, or use the word. But no, I think that really, let's not give Bernie Sanders too much credit. Really, the situation is he's just the other breathing human being that's not Hillary Clinton. So I think that the anti-Hillary sentiment is so extreme, even in her own party, that they'll vote for anyone other than her.
So that may be the larger factor there. Okay.
I would say it's a large ingredient.
A large ingredient, okay. And why is Hillary so vulnerable right now, or what is her biggest vulnerability?
I had a chuckle. Of course, every time Donald Trump opens his mouth, we all kind of either gasp or we chuckle, but when he said she might not even be allowed to run, I think it was yesterday he was talking about, Hillary Clinton might not even be allowed to run, and there's actually probably some legitimacy to that. I mean, she's under an FBI investigation now. It's just mind-boggling that we even have presidential candidates in a situation like what she's done legally with her classified documents and email and private server and all that. So, her Achilles heel is simply all of that baggage that comes along. I mean, who knows what? She can't really get a clean slate at this point.
Yeah. Okay, so to get to some substantive issues, I wanted to go over some of the possible tax plans that these folks are bringing forward. You know, each candidate generally will lay out their vision, and so you can judge them based on the merit of that vision. So, looking at taxation, what are some of the main plans that have been put forth in this race so far?
Yeah, well, I mentioned Ben Carson's, even though he's not a contender any longer, but because it was interesting, a couple interesting points about it. One was a across-the-board flat tax of 14.9%. And I confess I don't know where the 14.9 came from. Sounds pretty specific, or at least a scientific arrival at it, perhaps. And but one thing that's a nuance about his tax plan was all Social Security benefits would be tax-free. So that's kind of a nuance that could be attractive to people, a plan that incorporates something like that. Ted Cruz's plan is similar in that he'll go to a 10% flat tax on income. And both of their plans eliminate a tremendous number of deductions as well as credits. And so it just simplifies. It takes your marginal tax rates down and then eliminates some of the complexities of the tax code. But Cruz's plan eliminates all payroll taxes. And that's a fascinating thing to think, okay, well, how do we deal with some of the institutions like Social Security that are in place right now? So those are the two most simplified plans. Then you start to get into a little bit more complexity with Marco Rubio's plan, which would take you down to two tax brackets, a 15% bracket and a 35% bracket. And then again, he simplifies a lot of the deductions and loophole situation. Donald Trump takes you from, currently we have 7 tax brackets, by the way, marginal rates, and the top being 39.6%, to put in perspective. Trump will take us from those 7 brackets down to 3, 10% bracket, 20, and 25. Simplifying the code a bit, but really taking the existing structure and just making some modifications, like increasing the deduction for a single filer to $25,000, the standard deduction, $50,000 for married couples. So basically, with that standard deduction, you're not paying that income tax on that first, $25,000 or $50,000 that you make, or you're taking that off the top. So, in any case, that gives you an idea of where those candidates are. Some of them eliminate the income tax on corporations, while others reduce it, like Ted Cruz eliminates it, if I recall. And now Hillary Clinton, she's the most status quo on her tax plan. Takes the rates up on high-income earners like $5 million a year by increasing, essentially moving that top bracket from 39 to 43.6 from 39.6 with this 4% surcharge that would be put on. She also increases capital gains taxes on dividends and long-term capital gains. Bernie Sanders gets a little bit crazy here. Sanders actually has 4 new brackets. And he has a 37% bracket, and then a 43, 48, and 52% bracket. So really increases the marginal rates on every new dollar earned there. He takes things up on payroll taxes significantly. So currently on Social Security, you pay 6.2. If you're a W-2 wage earner, you pay 6.2% of your wages, up to $118,000 of wages, $118,500. You pay 6.2%. Your employer pays 6.2%. Well, Bernie would like the employer to pay an additional 6.2%. He adds a new payroll tax. So, if we're looking at an economic impact for jobs and the employers being willing to hire additional employees, try essentially increasing that payroll tax burden by 50%, and that would be pretty negative. he does some other monkeying around that's all very expensive. But the Tax Foundation came out with some numbers that are really interesting, showing that Carson, Cruz, and Rubio have plans that will actually expand the economy. Their tax plans will, adding to the bottom line of GDP and job growth and so on. But they will create some deficits over time. Cruz's plan is the most revenue neutral. So 10 years out with an expanding economy, his plan would cause us to fall short about $768 million. $768 billion.
Billion, okay.
Yeah, big number.
But we're in the trillions.
You were in the trillions, yeah. 768, that million, that would be a rounding number for the Feds.
Yeah, okay.
So 768 billion, but that's over 10 years. Now, other candidates are in the 2 and 3 and 5 trillion. Interestingly, Trump's tax plan would add more than $10 trillion of additional federal debt over the next 10 years. And I thought that's kind of fascinating, but that's from the Tax Foundation's economic model.
That's a huge number. So
it's the largest of all of them.
So none of these are actually going to chip away at the deficit?
Bernie Sanders would, to the tune of $9.8 trillion, because of that significant tax increase. He would essentially be pulling that $9.8 trillion out of private sector pockets and putting it in federal coffers. Now, one caveat to that, there has never been a federal government given $9.8 trillion over a 10-year period that didn't spend all of that and then some. So this has the assumption of current federal budgets. Now, what's Congress going to do if you hand them an extra $9.8 trillion? They'll save that? Will they reduce the debt with that? Is that what we're to assume?
I don't think so.
Yeah, never happened.
So all of this really comes down to basically fiscal policy and economics, what you believe works or doesn't work. And it seems like, some of the main theories are, one is if the government can get more money and then they can spend that money and, they can stimulate the economy in that way. And it gives the government more control and faith in the government to kind of curb economic growth if it's getting out of control and then spend when they need to. Then the other side is more, well, let's leave the money in the hands of the people and tax less and slim down government and then let the private sector kind of naturally function in a way that it should, and that will stimulate the economy and it will kind of self-regulate in a way. And I don't know if I'm oversimplifying that, but as someone who works with finances every day, which one of those two theories do you tend to believe in?
Yeah, and you're not oversimplifying it. Look, economics is real simple. It's a matter of allocation of resources. We all work, we earn something, and then with our budget in the home, our budget at work, we decide how we're going to allocate our resources. And so what you just described is two worldviews, one where those who earn and produce do the allocating of the resources, or the first that you said, the former, where some elite central planners know better than you who's producing for yourself how to allocate your resources. And so they'll then take them from you through taxes and do the allocation for you. So it's really no more complicated than that, those two worldviews of who should be doing the allocating, what's most efficient. I fall in the camp of the free market enterprise and capitalism, and we have varying degrees in that, where we move as a society, complete laissez-faire capitalism all the way through to National Socialism like the Nazis, or all the way around the spectrum to full-blown communism. So everybody falls somewhere on that spectrum, and the further you are toward the capitalist side, I guess you'll end up in that camp where the individual should do the allocating.
Does that lead to a series of booms and busts, though, if you really let it go unfettered?
Excellent question. I'd encourage viewers to do some comparison between Austrian school of economics versus Keynesian economics, because what you'll find with Keynesian economics is they believe the booms and busts can be moderated through monetary policy from a central bank, whereas Austrian economics makes the case that those booms and busts are actually caused by a fractional reserve banking system, and that if we had a monetary system that wasn't constructed in such a way to expand into booms and misallocate resources, we actually wouldn't get the booms and busts. Unfortunately, there is no economy on the planet that is closely tied to Austrian school of thought right now. But to your question directly, since we created the Federal Reserve in 1913, have we seen fewer booms and busts?
I don't think so.
No, we haven't. And the booms and busts prior to 1913, sure, there were some bad ones, 1873, 1907, but they were causes of a fractional reserve banking system that should have been improved and modified. And it's interesting to watch those busts corrected themselves very quickly rather than had long, drawn-out recoveries like the Great Depression.
Right. Okay, I want to jump to a new topic, but very interesting. We could do a show on capitalism.
Oh, don't get me started.
Yeah. So I wanted to come over to the price of oil.
Yeah.
This is something that we've all watched with great interest, and I know personally how it affects me. It seemingly directly is, wow, I'm paying a lot less at the pump. This is kind of nice. I used to be paying $80 or $70 to fill my tank up, and now I'm only spending, $40 or $50 or maybe even less than that. So it feels great when I'm filling up at the gas station, but I know there's more to it than that, and it actually has far-reaching, widespread consequences. So can you walk us through the impacts of the oil prices?
Yeah. Well, first off, if you bought a Tesla a couple years ago, you might want to return it, right? Now you're getting gas so much cheaper. But what we see in the investment markets is essentially a spillover or a contagion in that a lot of money during the boom in oil prices, a lot of money had been lent to exploration companies and producers of oil and natural gas. And when those prices come in, of course, just because the revenue drops on those companies doesn't mean those companies don't owe the money that they've borrowed. So it becomes a little bit more dangerous or risky as to whether the lenders will get paid back. So we've been seeing for the last year and a half, the high-yield bond markets and credit markets or loan markets have price declines. Defaults have risen a little bit, though not nearly as much as the market has priced in. So we'll see if that continues. So it's impacted other asset classes for investors, and it can have an impact of making people feel poorer. Because investment accounts decline, and then it causes people to be risk averse. The stock market has sold off as a result of that for the last 6 months, though we're getting a little bit of recovery now, it looks like. And so it's nice to have those price declines at the pump, but people don't generally think, well, if oil goes down, will it impact my bond portfolio? Or necessarily my stocks. They may think, well, I don't own Chevron or Exxon or, Energy Product Partners or something like that. So, but then the whole market can go off because people just don't want the risk in their portfolio any longer. And we've seen credit contraction around the globe in other countries, and so they then have to pull their money out of our markets, and our markets are impacted by that. Though our markets are very healthy, we're not on the precipice of recession. In fact, decreased commodity prices like we've seen in metals and mining and in oil are actually economically stimulative. Obviously not for that particular sector, but for all others where those are input costs for other companies. So a lot of opportunity right now as an investor for the person with a long view and can understand that this is more of a technical problem in the markets than a fundamental one.
What are the main causes for the decrease in the price of a barrel of oil?
Yeah. Boy, that, to speak to your statement of booms and busts, there you go, the readily available credit. And I'll throw a punch at the Federal Reserve right now and its low interest rates possibly for too long. Where were investors going to go to get a rate of return for their money and to be able to lend to energy companies when oil was $107 a barrel or something looked pretty good, pretty attractive. And so you had this readily available source of lending and an energy market whose price was up at that time, and essentially you get a boom there. Now that all that technological investment into production has caused oversupply now. I'd also counsel that, technology advanced well faster and better than perhaps investors would have expected. So now we have where the U.S. is actually oil independent now. We do not need to import oil now. So, we're because of fracking. So there's a technology that was originally not anticipated, perhaps as a lot of exploration and development investments were made. people didn't expect that type of supply would come online so big.
And then we still have all of this Middle Eastern oil and oil from other countries. I know that I believe Iran is coming back on the market now after we had that treaty, which maybe will make supply even more readily available, which may further reduce prices. And then folks like Saudi Arabia, who can kind of sell it well, or they can restrict the supply. They haven't chosen to restrict supply. They're still selling a lot of oil.
Yeah, it's interesting about that. If you had an unlimited supply, which essentially they've got oil that will outlast their lifetimes of anybody living there, so they don't really care. And let's say Saudi Arabia, if remember my number right, needs about $95 a barrel of oil in order to meet its budget targets for the government. Well, at $95 per barrel, you only had to sell 1 barrel of oil. Well, now you have to sell 3. Saudi Arabia doesn't care if they have to sell 3 to come up with $95, right? So you can be in a situation where simply just cash is king. Now, eventually, what we'll see is a lot of the producers that caused the oversupply, they had to get $80 or $60 a barrel in order for their projects to be viable, and those projects are coming offline. Problem is they're capital intensive and it takes time to work out, but commodity prices naturally correct.
So we'll see prices go back up at the pump, which is what most people kind of see.
Right.
Okay.
So buy that used Tesla that the guy's selling right now and be smart because you'll want it in a couple of years. Right?
All right. It came from Cory.
Right.
All right. So yeah, you'll have to charge something for that.
That's right.
But I must say I do like Teslas.
Oh, fantastic vehicle.
Yeah, they're beautiful for sure. In the last couple minutes that we have, can you just give us a short preview of our conversation to come about the state of Jefferson?
Yes, the state of Jefferson. All right. 21 counties have petitioned the state legislature for either legislation or resolution for statehood for rural Northern California. And if the legislature doesn't pay attention to that, it gives these counties standing for a lawsuit. And the objective of that lawsuit would be to have rural counties, essentially each county in the state get 1 vote in the Senate. That would be a nice outcome because then rural counties would have a little bit more say over their interests, which are very different than urban areas in the state. So that would be a nice outcome, or perhaps we get our own state and
so
the
California
51st.
could potentially become 2 states if this goes all the way to fruition.
It could, but there are 2 things have to happen. One, according to the U.S. Constitution, California's legislature has to approve the split, and so does Congress. Okay. So, long shot, but maybe we get the Senate fixed.
That's to come next time we have you on the show. Cory, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
You bet.
And thank you for joining me on this edition of Inside View. I'm your host, Joel Metzger, and I hope you join me next time.